Despite the various top 10s and episode reviews from the past years, there's still plenty of He-Man episodes worth talking about which I haven't gotten around to, so in today's video I'm going to review 3 episodes from the start of Season 1 which were overlooked when I did my very first He-Man review series. Let's start off with Sheilas Quest. Now to be fair, I didn't discuss Sheilas Quest because it's already such a well-known episode from the series, and I always felt that if you ever bothered to check out the He-Man episodes I've reviewed and recommended, you would have stumbled upon it eventually, but it definitely is such an important He-Man episode that I had to get around to reviewing it eventually, so here goes. At the start of the episode we see Queen Marlena using a memory projector to show Adam how she came to Eternia. Then Teela walks in and berates Adam for lazing about during battle practice that morning. This prompts her to ask Duncan about her biological parents, and we learn that her father was a soldier in the Eternian army, but Man-at-Arms remains tight-lipped about who her mother is. Teela then gets it in her head to go ask the Oracle of the Crystal Sea about her past. Orko accidentally blurts out to Adam where she's going, and the concerned Adam becomes He-Man in order to go after her. As it turns out, Merman wants to get Teela in revenge of a past grudge with her father. Teela makes it to the Oracle, but gets captured. Merman wants to offer her as a sacrifice to a giant sea monster, but He-Man shows up, defeats the monster, and saves Teela. Teela then finally gets to ask the Oracle who her mother is, and she finds out that she's none other than the Sorceress. However, the Sorceress then removes Teela's memory of the events, so that she'll only remember that her mother was a woman who loved her, and leaves the secret with He-Man. Sheilas Quest was a monumental episode in the sense that it really delved into the relationship between Teela, her adopted father, and the Sorceress, and consequently, it's become a fan-favorite episode. It's definitely high quality from the production point of view, and especially considering it's such an early episode from the series. However, I've never considered the episode to be really top tier as far as He-Man episodes go, and you can all probably guess why. My biggest gripe with the episode is that the main villain is Merman. Now this episode actually is interesting in that it actually establishes Merman and Duncan as being old enemies, but the fact that this rivalry was never followed up in any later episodes means that it loses its impact. Merman is at least moderately sinister in this episode, but I just would have preferred if the bad guy had been Skeletor or some original one-off character. Past that though, this episode is definitely one of the best written from the whole series by none other than Paul Dini, who went on to work in Batman the Animated Series, and who wrote many other high-quality He-Man scripts. So for its story credentials, this episode is absolutely worthwhile. Sadly, the fact that the Sorceress is also Teela's mother isn't followed up very often, only incidentally here and there, and it's a shame considering the implications it has for the characters. The next episode I want to talk about is Evil-Lyn's Splott. This is a standout episode from the start of Season 1, and it's also the introduction of these dwarf people called the Widgets. The episode begins with Skeletor's goons attacking the Widgets and He-Man coming to the rescue. He learns that Skeletor was after Korodite, the magic ore which is what He-Man's baldric is made of, and which adds to He-Man's strength. After Skeletor's disappointing defeat, Evil-Lyn comes up with a plan to trick the Widgets. She disguises herself and has Panther chase her. The Widgets save her, and she makes them think that her family is lost somewhere in the forest. Squinch, who is the only Widget left to look after her, shows her the Korodite and Evil-Lyn nabs it. The finale is pretty uneventful, although we do get to see a rather rare one-on-one match between He-Man and Skeletor. The Widgets help out by trapping Evil-Lyn, and in the end, Skeletor escapes. Evil-Lyn's Splott may seem like your typical magical artifact of the day type storyline, but what really makes this episode for me is all the goofy animation, especially when Skeletor berates Beastman and Merman. There's also a completely random point at the start of the episode where He-Man saves a boy's cart, and then somehow welds a broken chain together with his bare hands.
There you go, fella.
My favorite character in this episode is actually Squinch, voiced by John Irwin, He-Man's voice actor.
Hey, Skeletor's mean kitty's after some poor gal.
Squinch has a bossy girlfriend named Laura, and he seems like a complete goof. However, when Evil-Lyn tricks him, Squinch goes out to help He-Man because he feels that he has to make up for his mistake. We also learned that the witches have a He-Man signal, which is pretty funny, especially since Filmation was the studio which animated the Batman cartoon series in the 1960s. Evil-Lyn's Splott is a really fun episode, not perhaps excellent or groundbreaking for the series, but definitely on par with other well-written, well-animated, and well-paced ones from Season 1, such as Like Father, Like Daughter. I also think it's easily the best episode starring the Widgets, who would return for 3 more episodes, but unfortunately each time they were less and less interesting. Even Squinch didn't appear that much in those later episodes, but this one I do recommend. Lastly, let's talk about Daimar the Demon. This, in my view, is one of the more underrated episodes from the start of Season 1, and I would have wanted to have included it in the very first He-Man series reviews. The opening premise might be a little hard to swallow, but let's get that out of the way. Firstly, Duncan has discovered a way to view a dark dimension with the help of the Sorceress's Book of Magic. Meanwhile, Orko is bored out of his mind and discovers a picture of Daimar in the book. So just so he'll have someone to play with, he releases Daimar from the book. So when did Orko get the power to bring picture books to life? Anyway, Orko's actions begin having bizarre effects all across Eternia, as it turns out that releasing Daimar opens a rift between Eternia and the dark dimension. Eventually Daimar gets tired of playing and turns into a cocoon. When he hatches, he's become a giant demon and heads for Castle Grayskull. Things look bad until Orko is able to reason with Daimar not to destroy the castle. Daimar returns to the dark dimension, sealing the rift, and everything goes back to normal. Even though Daimar the Demon has a pretty hefty leap of logic at the start, I actually find Daimar to be a pretty adorable character, well, before he turns into a giant demon. And I also really like this episode because the day is saved by Orko just being a decent person. Another awesome thing about this episode is all the weird shit that starts to happen with the dark dimension breaking through. I've always liked it in He-Man when magical things start to go awry, and this is where I think this episode's strengths lie. Now, even though the plot setup's a little ridiculous, not that surprising since the screenwriter for this episode also penned such gems as A Friend in Need, Kalasar Awakes, and The Song of Solis, I think it's an episode that keeps getting steadily better the further it goes. There is a pretty meaningless B storyline with Evil-Lyn sneaking into the castle and stealing the Book of Magic. Other than just showing her defiance against Skeletor, it's pretty meaningless, although sort of interesting. I'm perhaps more disappointed that Skeletor himself doesn't actually get to do much in this episode, although he sounds considerably more sinister than in most episodes, which I guess is a slight consolation. Personally, I think Daimar the Demon has enough novel elements to stand on its own. It may not have the best writing in the series, but pretty darn good production quality. In my view, it's great stuff. And that's all for this time. Next time, I'll bring you a top 10 of my favorite He-Man standalone villains. Until then, I have the power, so can you.